Welcome to Past Bedtime Talks, a brand new series from Past Bedtime Studio where we discuss storytelling, production, a host of related topics, and anything else we find influential in our creative pursuits. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and visit us at pastbedtimestudio.com for more information. I'm your host, Shahab Mir, and today I'm sitting down with the founders of Past Bedtime Studio and creators of Philip's Apocalypse, Ben Arjang and Jeremy B. Steven. Okay, so how are you guys?
Good.
Doing good, thank you very much. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for calling me, for having me here. Okay, so let's start with how did you start liking an idea of writing musics and stuff, and how it helps you guys to join and create this podcast?
Well, for me, I started playing the violin at the age of 3. So that was kind of my introduction into music, really. And it's kind of been a part of my life since then. I do it professionally. I'm a professional violinist, but I kind of got into writing in high school. That was sort of my my introduction into writing, was like poetry and sci-fi. I read a lot in high school.
Have you ever had any fan fiction about?
No.
Sci-fi? Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I haven't gone that far, but I've written a lot of poetry and short stories and that kind of thing.
Nice. What's your favorite book that you've read? Maybe poetry, anything.
That's tough. My favorite book. I might have to think about that. Well, I'll tell you the book that I've read most recently was Artemis by the same guy who wrote The Martian. Andy Weir,
movie Martian?
Yeah, the guy who wrote the book originally.
Okay.
Yeah, he wrote this new one called Artemis.
Nice.
It's really good.
What else? What's your hobbies? What's your favorite hobby to do in your pastimes?
Well, I mean, kind of the burden of being a musician is that it's your life and your hobby and kind of everything. It's all consuming a little bit. But on the side, I collect vintage games, like Nintendo stuff.
Nice.
So that's my kind of hobby, I guess I would say. And I mean, I love movies and video games and all that kind of stuff too.
Who doesn't?
Yeah. So, yeah, lots of enjoyable stuff.
Nice. What's your favorite game?
Oh.
Well, I assume that you're a Nintendo fan. That's for sure.
I'm a Nintendo fan.
Yeah.
I would say one of the games that made a huge impact on me was Journey.
And not the Journey on the independent game, the indie game.
Yeah, the indie game.
That's the one? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is a really beautiful game.
Yeah, there was something about it that really struck me. It was kind of an amazing fusion of minimalist storytelling with a really great score and soundtrack by Austin Wintory.
Nice.
So that game really made a big impact on me. I would also say like The Last of Us was another big influence.
Of course.
Yeah, it just kind of nailed that zombie genre really well, and sort of, not so much focusing on the disease aspect of it, but really the human characters within it.
Right.
Yeah.
So Ben, tell me about yourself. Tell me about what are your hobbies? What are your interests, and how did you start just joining this podcast?
To be honest, I don't know. I like creating stuff. I like to see it, being part of it, observe it, whatever it, anything that to do with making stuff, I guess. When I was doing engineering, and when I was studying engineering, and I'm still doing programming, the theme was the same. You observe systems, you make them, and I do the same thing in here. And that's the part of story making that appeals to me. It's the making part. When you want to make some real life system or product, you really have to think about the overhead and
the process of it.
The process.
Yeah.
You need to worry about the size, about dimension. It has a lot of overhead about who's going to buy it, who's going to consume it, when it's going to be consumed, standard policies, bylaws, a lot of things. But in story, everything is up to you. Makes it difficult a lot of times because you need to be very consistent and very diligent in setting up the axioms and assumptions of your story.
So what are kind of like challenges you would face that process?
To To be honest, cross-checking, making sure that for me, I enjoyed. I didn't even want to call it a challenge. It's the pull really. It's what keeps me wanting to do it more. It's the challenge, as you said, when you have to go through the story that you have set and you've made, the world that you have created, and try to figure out what are the things that don't make sense, what are the things that are not appealing, what are the paradigms of the story, what's the mindset of the people, feeling really sympathetic for the characters, what are their incentive, what's their motivation, why they do something, why they don't do something. All of these things kind of contribute again to that whole idea of making something. You make a system and then you really tweak the parameters, you make sure that you fine tune it, and I enjoy that. I enjoyed it when I was doing engineering and programming, making whatever, and also in story. I think it's pretty cool. It's really refreshing when you look back and you kind of go through the process that you have that you've been
Connecting
through.
the dots.
Yeah, exactly. The connecting the dots, I think, is the most joyful part.
I can actually relate to you because right now I'm a student in University of Manitoba, and I study film studies right now at U of M. And the idea of being a film student is also they're teaching us how to observe and how to see the movie's perspectives, see the movie's angles, to see the movie's parts of creation, the process of how the dots are connected, and how a story is related to the character, how the character is trying to portray what they are portraying. So this kind of process I can relate to. It teaches me how understand and how to write and how to see see myself in that character. It's really interesting.
And I'm gonna ask, what made you want to do this mini-series podcast?
I really, of course, I was just asked and I said yes, but that's pretty much the whole story. But I really wanted to have a podcast of my own for a long time. I was thinking of creating a podcast, a personal podcast, to have and to talk about many things, many different things. Talk about musics and video games. Kind of have a broad idea of things to talk about. And when the opportunity came and you asked me for this mini series, I definitely said yes. Why not? Because it kind of helps me to also learn and learn from the experience and learn how to start a podcast. I forgot to ask you, Ben. What are your hobbies? What do you like to do? Do you like video games, movies? What is it?
To be honest, everything. I really don't have. I can't say I have a hobby.
So in your pastime, what do you do?
My pastime right now. For the last few months.
Past bedtime.
Yeah, exactly.
It's Past Bedtime Studio.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The past few months, past time has been Past Bedtime.
Oh, that's great.
What I enjoy, to be honest.
I'm sorry, my dear viewers. No pun intended. Carry on.
Yeah.
I want to ask you one last thing.
Yeah.
What do you like about hearing other people's conversations in a podcast?
When I listen to other people's podcast, I just close my eyes, imagine that I am sitting with them, but I don't exist in that present. I don't exist in that area. So I close my eyes and imagine that actually people are sitting in front of me, they're having a talk, and I'm just listening to it. Because I could tell you, back when I was a kid, when I was like a super tiny boy, I used to my parents used to take me to relatives' house and people back in Iran. And when you're a kid in the culture, in Iranian culture, you have to always be quiet and listen to elders talk. And that just kind of moved on to me to now that I am I love listening to the conversation of elders. I like to listen to what they are talking about. It could be business, it could be politics, it could be any kind of thing, and I just love to listen to that and take some tiny points about each conversation and just like have an opinion about myself. I could tell you that my identity is created by listening to others. I enjoy getting information from just a normal conversation. I love to listen, but at the same time, I love to talk. I love to also bring out what I've got. It's kind of an entry and out, and like an input and an output kind of thing. It's a simple, but that's how I enjoy listening to podcasts, because getting information is super easy. It's just that getting the right information is how you distinguish in a conversation. Like I could sit down and talk about let's imagine a movie. Let's talk about Justice League, the movie. I could listen to it and I could see a bunch of negative points of that movie, but then there's always some positive things about that movie that in the conversation will be brought up. So I would just pickpocket them, and have that opinion of two sides, of positiveness and negativeness.
Right. So nothing's ever kind of black and white.
Yeah, there's nothing. Yeah. I think the color of the world is gray. You find everything in the world, bad and good.
And I think that's kind of important as an artist too, is to see everything in that way where you can quickly distinguish between negative and positive qualities, not just like, oh, this was bad, I hate it automatically. There's exactly. always something to learn from everything in a way.
Exactly. Well, I want to also talk about myself, my background. I already told you guys that I'm a student, film studies right now, and I genuinely am really interested on creating a movie. Like, from past year, when I got into film studies, arts faculty and film studies major, at the beginning I didn't have any idea, to be honest, because I didn't know what I wanted to be. I enjoyed when I started university, I enjoyed video games, and I had this idea of, okay, I love video games, I want to make new video games. So I went for computer science programming, and when I got into the world of programming, it was completely a shock to me, because as an Iranian boy who learned English to come to a country of English speaking, it was a difficult challenge for me to learn a new language from my own mother tongue. And when I got here, I had to learn another language, which is programming, a computer, which completely is hard to understand in my opinion. But it's a possible thing, and it was tough and challenging for me to understand programming aspects of computer, and it took me. I would be honest with you guys. It took me a year and a half to understand that maybe this is not my cup of tea. This is something that I'm wasting my time right now. The time is valuable, and I'm wasting money. So I talked to many people. I talked to Ben a couple of times. He gave me a lot of pointers about what's my personality, what I like. I talked to my parents, and they talked to me about what I am really good at. And they said, you should try something with movies and something about storytelling, because you love about movies. You love to talk about them, and I had interest. I never thought about it as of something real, something professional, but as a career. But when surround my people around me, then they gave me that hope and that push and the courage, I got interested, and I was like, yeah, I'm hooked to this film world, and I love to try it. And I find myself more happy from before, because I feel like I'm super passionate about something that I really like and I like to talk about.
Right.
And it really showed me the true path, I would say.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say, with that you started computer programming, because in a way, like you said, it's a new language, and music is very much
a new language. I agree.
It's a totally different language, and if you don't start, as a young person, it's really difficult. It takes a lot of effort to get fluent in that language if you don't start young.
Exactly.
So yeah, I can understand that challenge.
It's really interesting.
I actually do believe that programming, that's my thought. It hasn't been scientifically proven, and this is a big claim. But I think you use your language part of your brain, the language part of your brain to program. At the beginning, while you are rationalizing it, you may be using your logic. But I think after a while, you start to talk to it, in fact. And
to connect to it.
I think you use the brain part, the language part of your brain. It's just the same reason that's why kids can pick up a language really fast, and that's why they can learn how to use a computer much faster.
Yeah.
And so I think there's really a language element to it.
Yeah.
That's my.
The brains of kids are so
elastic.
Malleable.
Yes.
And you can, if you introduce them to something young, and they keep at it, their brains are so pliable. They can grow.
Magnet,
they can grow into it and understand it on a level that's, almost impossible for an adult who starts that same thing later on. But actually, speaking of language, this is why I really liked Arrival. Have you seen that movie?
Oh, of course, Arrival.
Yeah.
Arrival,
oh
yes.
my God, that was my favorite movie.
Yeah. So that movie,
2017, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So the reason I brought that up is because I think the whole point of that movie was really to show how language influences the way you think and process time, and I think that's very true.
I agree.
There
is a big question that if you could not talk any language, could you think?
Right.
Can you think in no language? So I mean, there's a whole thing about it, like dyslexia and a lot of tests. There's a scientific background behind it. I'm not familiar with it, but I've read a bit on it. But I don't think anyone has really looked at the programming side. I think even programmers kind of migrate the functionality from. It's just like when you learn a new language. At the beginning, you have to formulate the sentences. After a while, your brain picks it up, and you don't really have to ask yourself, is this a verb? Do I have to conjugate it? What time is it? You just talk. So I think I agree with you. It's a language that it's definitely a third, I don't know, fifth language that you have to pick up.
Apparently we have this good theme about language. I just thought about something really smart. I love it. I think that language is a way for our brain to talk in the world, to bring it out. Let's imagine how programming, right? You enter a code, and then you collect it,
right.
and you complex it, and you compile it, and then you got the result. I think that the coding is our thought and our brain, and our brain tries, exactly. They compile it, and the output is the language we speak and how we interact with each other, and that's really interesting.
And it's like Carl Sagan.
Carl Sagan.
I don't know if he said. I don't know if it was him or if it was Neil deGrasse Tyson, but they kind of made this idea that the purpose of sentient life is for the universe to be able to observe itself.
Exactly.
So it's kind of related the same way, like what you're talking about with coding.
Was it on what was that? I know the show that Neil deGrasse is in it. It's also Carl Sagan. He continued the Carl Sagan's show.
Cosmos,
exactly. Yeah, that's from it. I love that show too. It's my favorite. About my hobbies, I forgot to explain to that. I love video games. I love video games to the death. I don't know why would I say that.
What kind?
I love storytelling.
Story-driven.
Story-driven games. Well, you could think of playing games like Fortnite or Counter-Strike, something like you just have tactical. To just sit down with friends and play. But I love storytelling games, especially Assassin's Creed series. Oh my God, this series is my favorite because of the story arc that they go through, and how they had about Assassin's Creed. They have this outer story art of the present day, and then they go back in machines and go back in time, and they they sub collect some stories of their ancient ancestors. So they cover the Renaissance era of Ezio Auditore, and then they go to the Pirates Day of the Pirates. They become some story, and then they go to the future. To London Victorian era, and then they just go back all the way to Egypt. I love the storytelling of how they start this, and then they have this whole collective present story. Yeah, that would be my favorite game, and I'm still playing Origins right now. That's really interesting. I want to talk about how this. How did you guys start this company? Why Past Bedtime? Sorry, why Past Bedtime Studio? Why?
Do you mean the namesake?
Yeah,
why
sure.
We call
The progress of how do you guys started this
right.
kind of company, and then after that, let's go and start about Philips. Why the story came up, and why Philips Apocalypse?
Sure.
I think we both have our own approach towards a story to tell. I think. I personally, as I said, I really was looking for making something. I realized that the telling story appeals to me much more than I initially thought. I think in that sense, me and you, Shab, are very similar. That we kind of discounted how interested we are. And the other thing was, in fact, my active pursuit of suspending my disbelief.
Right.
I think if it didn't have certain elements, I really don't know what those elements were, it would not appeal to me. If I feel like I'm too distant from the subject matter. But can't remember what triggered me. I think it was the question that, well, if you accept the premise, then what? And that's I think the time that the light bulb went on in my head, and I realized that if I can suspend my disbelief and if I can accept the premise, then a lot of things make a lot more sense suddenly. You can step really into a different world, and the same thing happens even in science. For example, one of the ideas for multiverse is if some of the basic parameters of the world was different, we would have a different world. And then they would continue to say...
time is connecting the multiverse, I think.
Yeah, they say then, how come our universe has the right parameters, the exactly right parameters? It's the same thing over there. What if some of these properties of our world was different? It's really a game, It's you analyze the consequences of your earlier decisions, the axioms, assumptions, whatever, your principles, and that started to appeal to me more and more. And I wrote a few short stories, showed them to Jeremy, and I think the time was just right that Jeremy was also looking to work on something. In fact, Jeremy had talked to me about doing a talk show, similar to what your idea is and similar to this little show that we have. But at the time, I didn't know if I have anything to say. At the same time, at the other hand, I was really interested. I would have been interested to it. I realized I would be interested in it if there's the element of curation in it and not just talking. So I discussed that with Jeremy, and Jeremy so happened to have the right, I think, subject matter, and everything was just right. I think
it's just built up in a good way. What about you, Jeremy? How did that start from your perspective?
Well, Ben I got to know Ben because he was working on something with a former roommate of mine, and he would come over every night, and they'd be downstairs working on their project. And I was thinking that would be really cool if I had someone like that who was equally invested in a project, and we could work on it together. And so my roommate, of course, had to leave the country, but Ben was still looking for something to do, and I had this sort of podcast idea. It was more talk related, actually, to do with movies. I thought, what if we got 4 friends together and we just sat down for an hour after seeing a movie and just talked about it. But then I don't remember exactly how we got into the idea of audio drama.
I think. Well, I showed you the little story, the short story that
Right,
I
right.
wrote, and then I asked you, do you want to do anything? I think at the beginning, I wasn't even sure that I remember. I wasn't sure that what you want to do with the story.
Right.
But then because
you guys
at
were
the
not
time,
on the same page on that part.
well, I didn't know at the time how much Jeremy has spent time in voiceover and storytelling world. Just didn't know that aspect of
Right.
him. But because of Michael's, I mean, we haven't talked a lot about him still, but because of Michael's work on Philip's Apocalypse, I think that was our biggest guide because there was already a framework.
Yeah.
When we started going through our options, this stood out because it was the most developed, and Michael and his talent was there. So we thought that why not realize the abilities, the structure that's already there. Why not realize its potential?
Yeah, and not only that, but when Michael was first making this series, back in his teens, he had always sort of intended on doing more with it, and I think it was my first year of university here that he was like, I want to do more with Philip's Apocalypse, and so I wrote him an episode, and I really was proud of it. I really liked the writing itself and the story and everything like that. And so when we kind of came up with the idea of doing an audio drama, that piece that I had written, I was like, what if we just start from there, and build a new kind of direction, but still retaining these
basics.
elements, these elements that Michael had established with the character and the atmosphere. I think it was kind of a natural fit.
Right. The idea was there. Also, I think it grew faster than we expected. To be honest, we wrote episode 1, which turned out into episode 2, and then we wrote a new episode 1, and that, I think, reversal of time, and that whatever, just the experience of writing it kind of opened up new prospects, and I think it took off from there, really. I guess the story guided us, and the more we went into it, I think we also had a few things that we wanted to add. For example, Jeremy's musical background really guided us as well, because we realized that we can make all of these peripheral mediums, for example, drawing, or even at some point I still would like to continue on that. I thought if you can tell a story or show something using the natural elements of a website, that is unique and interesting on its own. It has limited capability, but it is, I think, something that hasn't been fully realized, or I think I can add a bit to it, really, at the end. And when we added all of these things, like, okay, let's make some artwork for it, let's make some music, and let's use the website in a different way. All of these things, the entire spectrum of what we did really guided the story, and we realized that I think we have something to say.
We sort of started earlier on where we were going to share the writing duties, but I think our voices were so different, we realized we needed one consistent voice. So, for that reason, I'm doing the writing, but, the story and plot design is really
I think it's shared,
a result of both of our efforts.
Yes. It usually, we come up with an idea, we resolve it, and then we explore it. We compare to the things that we have established in the past. I think that's pretty much might be the standard operation procedure for most people.
Yeah.
You say something, you explore it, you realize that it doesn't work out, or it does work out, and I guess there are a lot of times that you just walk in doing your daily life, then suddenly something hits you in the head, and you're like, oh, I really can connect what Jeremy said to what he said in the past, and then my idea about this, and then, in fact, that's, I think, the most enjoyable time, that when everything clicks and you're like,
Okay.
this is so interesting. You can explore it further.
The moment when the light bulb just lights up and
Goes
you're
on.
top of
Yeah,
your
exactly.
head.
Well, Ben sort of, we had started by designing scenarios.
Mhm.
So we'd say like, okay, let's just come up with a scenario like that we could develop into story material. And Ben sort of came up with this idea about a building, more or less, that was intended to be like, I don't know, a one episode deal.
Right.
And then everything kind of, you know, as we were developing it, we realized, oh, you know, this can have much more significance. We can grow out of this small idea and really create something big out of this. So, you know, the scenario way of doing things
Right.
seemed to work preliminarily, you know, as a small way of just creating isolated events
Right.
that you can maybe string together at some point.
And a few experimental things, for example, the part that is, I wish more people would enjoy it, is the part that we call heightened hearing.
Mhm.
It's when Philip meditates or controls his nerves and explores the inside of the building.
Mhm.
So that was more something I've learned from, I mean, one of the engineering principles is prototyping. You make
Right.
something in isolation and try to connect it now to the context and to other stuff. So that was one, maybe the part that we added, took some time for us to formulate it, realize what's in our mind, how can we communicate it to the audience. Even right now, I don't know if it's very obvious about the heightened hearing part, if the audience really sees it the way we have, but at the same time, that has been the most interesting part, getting people's feedback on it. Everybody sees it differently, so they interpret it. Some people say, oh, I thought Philip is doing this. Some other people say Philip was doing that. The interesting part is
It's subjective because
it's
it's everyone
subjective,
having their own perspective.
but there's a
Yeah, exactly.
similar theme.
Yeah.
There's a similar theme. People come up with something that is still comparable.
Right.
It's not so. We did add some embellishment to it. I think the music was the part that probably took the most
And I
effort
feel
for
like
the first episode, because as Jeremy said, the big structure of the first episode was there already, and since we have written many more episodes after that, it kind of solidifies the things that you have to say over the first episode, because they have implications, and once you explore the implications later on, you become more confident or decide to remove something from the first episode. So I guess first episode, the biggest part was the music, the heightened hearing part, and a few other things like the company tag, of the embellishment and peripheral stuff, like auxiliary things that you make.
That's your favorite parts of the podcast. What about you, Jeremy? What are the favorite what are the favorite aspects of the podcast you enjoyed? I assume the music, because you were mostly being true yourself with creating the music of the podcast. Did you enjoy that's the only part you enjoyed most, or was there any other aspects of the? Because I can see Ben was using he loved the idea of this enduring concepts inside the story of the how Phillips look around. What about you?
Well, I mean, the way you described it is very much how Ben thinks, and I think that's why we make good partners, is because he can like break something down and, you know, kind of develop everything sort of in isolation, and where I sort of need to actually do it. So it's like, it's hard for me to come up with a story where I'm more, because I'm a musician, I work a lot in mood, I would say. So when I sit down and I'll maybe have a small idea, but I'm kind of really working off the mood I'm going for. So when I start writing something, it's mostly in that vein that kind of propels my creativity, I would say. And as a musician, it's sort of the same thing, you know. The music really, I had written the theme a while ago in sort of for Michael, because I already had this idea of how the format should be, and I was like, oh, what if there's theme music? And because he didn't really have that in his early work, but so I had this theme music lying around, so that was kind of done. I really liked it, thought it was catchy. It was kind of a a bit of a shining beacon to the dismal atmosphere of the situation he's in. But the music within the podcast sort of came about after Mike had recorded the narration dialogue for us. I had asked him, I was like, okay, we have the episode done. Can you just like take a few minutes and just record the, all the narration stuff, not the live action stuff, but like just Philip's narration dialogue. So he did that. And because primarily I already knew in my mind that these sections would likely need music. So I got him to record those, and then I worked off of his dialogue to sort of write the music and come up with the mood. And it was a little difficult at first, kind of getting the feel right, but I quickly realized that it was good to listen to his voice, come up with a mood and an idea, and sort of create it on its own,
Right.
and then fit his dialogue to the music to kind of amplify it, and in a way they can work together simultaneously to kind of enhance each other. The music can't be too complicated because then it overpowers the dialogue, and so you kind of, I feel like it's necessary to make these two elements work together in the best way possible. And for me, that was chopping up the dialogue and fitting it to the music I had come up in the first place by listening to his dialogue.
Talking about elements, obviously the first episode is called Fire, and when I listened to the podcast for like two times, I could see a lot of elements of fire and burning, the relative of this idea. Why fire? Why start with the idea of fire as the first episode?
I guess the biggest part was we wanted to be true to Michael's original idea as much as possible. And fire was definitely the central theme there. But we realized that we can use the fire as metaphor for a lot of other things, either the struggle or his hope. And it's very elemental. Like, I think it's very intrinsic for all of us. Fire has been making bonfire, I think, plays to the primordial and primate in all of us. Bonfire. So making fire, I mean, you've definitely seen guys and people fight a lot over who's gonna make the fire.
Oh yes,
it definitely has.
Especially men when it comes to barbecue.
Yes, exactly.
It's like, I have to do it. The dad of the family is the one who's making the barbecue. Yeah. That is true.
I guess
you have to make the fire.
And I think it is definitely something like natural in all of us. Yeah. It's maybe the leader. You call the shots. It's the very pure representation of life, and it's a double-edged sword, right? It brings life. It definitely propelled our civilization, and I mean, there's so many about theories about how fire allowed us to, for example, cook, so we take more nutritions out of meat, and it allowed our brain to develop even further.
Right.
And that was maybe one of our advantages over other animals, because they just could not master fire. But at the same time, it can hurt. It can destroy a lot of things. Right, yeah, it certainly is a big concern. And there are so many examples of catastrophes due to fire. And so we have this love-hate relationship with it. And it's everywhere,
Yeah.
I guess I don't know what animals think about it. That's what I always ask myself. Like, do for example, eagles, I know that when they see smoke, they associate it with a little other, like, prey running away and exposing themselves. So they're attracted to it.
Oh, but so for the hunting reason.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's what I've read. I don't know. I'm not an expert in the subject, but it, I think, has this love-hate relationship, life-death relationship. It has a lot. It's a double-edged sword in many different subjects and philosophies.
I agree, because you could think of the idea, this basic idea about fire. It can be love. It can be how fear, family, kind of like warmness, closeness, and then burning, that fire, the destruction. And then you have you heard of the idea when people say, oh, I've seen the fire in his eyes, he's
Right.
excited but also he's about to do something really dangerous. So this basic idea of fire is really interesting because you can interpret it in different ways of different ideas. In the podcast, in the episode, I feel like at the beginning it was more about the danger and the how the sun is danger to the human skin, so they are like scared to go. Philip is scared to go outside, but then after that, the fire represented itself more like about love towards that wolf, towards that animal, and then love about his look. He's excited. He really wants to find his family. So that fire, that warmness, it has a lot of different aspects, and it's really interesting. And I that was one thing that I really enjoyed about the episode. It really intrigued me it really connected me to understand the feeling and the amazing of how the struggles is for Philip at that moment. And also the music obviously helped a lot to bring up that feelings and that how can I say, the feelings and aspects of the situation, of the dialogue. It was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, music in this way primarily functions to enhance the mood. So I really tried to, use it only where I felt, we needed a bit more of something, that the silence wasn't quite enough.
Yeah.
Where you needed something from that. And also, I should say that when I had written this episode, a movie that me and Mike really liked was The Road.
Which one is that?
With Viggo Mortensen. It's a post-apocalyptic movie where he's on a journey with his son, and they're trying to get to the coast to warmer weather, and but that movie dealt a lot with the internal fire, and that's sort of what I paid homage to when I wrote this episode, was that movie. In a point, his dad mentions, don't ever lose the fire, like that will to live, to keep going. And so that's why I primarily wrote this episode, to kind of get Philip his fire back in some way. And so that's kind of where that idea came from.
Okay, Jeremy, how did you originally start connecting yourself to this project?
Well, my good friend Michael Johnston, I've known him since he was probably 12 or 13 years old, something like that. We were both active on this website called voiceactingalliance.com. He was just kind of getting into it, and I was doing voice acting and things like that as well. But I had done a little project, and I needed a young voice actor, and he auditioned, and I was like blown away at how good he was. And so we got to know each other. He was interested in animation. He was a really good artist, really good voice actor. He could sing really well. He was really interested in music. So we connected a lot on that. We'd have Skype sessions where we just, play chess online or something, or he would have written some kind of piece of music and he wanted help with it, or, he was doing animation at that time too. So we got to be good friends. And he came out with Philip's Apocalypse. I don't remember what year it was, but it came out on newgrounds.com as part of a voice acting contest. So the requirements were that you had to show like multiple variety of voices.
Right.
So he basically created Philip's Apocalypse as a story that was recorded over a nursery rhyme tape. So every once in a while you'd hear the original nursery rhyme kick in. Okay. Like where he left a gap in the tape or something. And so he would do the voice of this, little old lady, and like reciting this nursery rhyme. And it was interspersed with two different characters of Philip. One was the young one who had just sort of experienced this disaster and was talking about it. And then at the end, it was the older Philip who had been listening to this tape. So it was really cool. And he really kind of created this unique situation and unique world.
And is this still in Newgrounds?
I don't think it's on there anymore.
Oh, they took it off.
But yeah, it's really good. I mean, the original stuff is really good. I don't know how Michael feels about it, but I always liked it. But he made a second episode for it, which dealt with kind of the origin story. And at one point he wanted to, keep going with it as kind of an audio drama. We never thought about podcasting at that time. It wasn't too much of a thing back then. But so he made this second episode, and it was much more drama style. It didn't deal with the tape recording stuff. It was all very much like what we're doing now, in sort of that vein. And that's kind of what really motivated me when I wrote the third episode for him, was that sort of style of narration with live action stuff. Yeah.
I really, really like to have a conversation with Michael. Hopefully one time we can get him to this podcast and help us. I like to talk about how he came up with the idea of Philip's Apocalypse.
Yeah.
And how he started with the story. So where do you see yourself going with this project, guys?
Well, the production is still there, and the other part is, as we talked about, the importance test audience and audience in general. We think we should find better ways, easier ways to connect to our audience. Hopefully we will have an audience, gain audience, show what we have. So outreach is going to be a big portion of what we have to do. Right now we are on SoundCloud, iTunes, Overcast, Stitcher, and we are syndicating and providing our content there, and we are trying to connect to our audience and connect to find and sustain our connection to audience with our website pastbedtimestudio.com, with a Facebook page, with Twitter, Instagram.
Yeah.
And so a big portion of it is right now try to present this to people, and hopefully they will like it.
Mm-hmm.
The first episode, the only problem is that the first episode is out yet, because we've decided that we are going to use the first episode as a demo, as a trailer, while we are working on the rest of the season, and we are currently planning to releasing the entire season at once.
How many episodes will it be?
The first season is going to have 10 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And what we are also hoping to do at the same time is Kickstarter.
Right.
Talk to me about the Kickstarters, guys.
Well, I mean, as Ben said, because we're using the first episode as sort of a trailer, we want it to kind of help us fund the rest of the show.
Right. Because we are hoping that we can expand the cast. We can get better sound effects, equipments. Hopefully, one of our bigger, deeper visions is to be able to present the story using different mediums. This is an audio drama.
Right.
So, and people at the end of the day need a lot of visual clues and visual representation of what they've been hearing. So we have realized that it really enhances the experience if we can provide more content through other mediums. So maybe we've made the poster, which is going to serve as some visual representation of what they've been hearing, but we have a lot more ideas about going through what Philip has been carrying, let's say the content of his bag.
Mm-hmm.
Some drawing and sketches, more from the world. We want to present more from the world, but it can't be all done through the audio. So we have to bring a lot of it to life through graphics and maybe music and maybe comics. So we have a lot of ideas there, so our plan for Kickstarter is going to actually connect the audience and listener to Philip. The Kickstarter is just not going to be a fundraiser. In fact, it's going to be an aspect, if it's going to be successful, it's going to be an aspect of the story, and it's going to tell its own version of the story. And it's not going to be just like, if you go through the Kickstarter, you'll learn more and you'll be engaged more with Philip and the world. Yes,
the world
what has happened.
Yeah.
It will give you some insight into the background, into the event, what was the catastrophe, how things unraveled. So that's the other part. And of course, we need to be able to sustain this, to host it, to maybe attract more talent. We're also planning on doing a Patreon campaign at the same time. So that's going to be for the ongoing
Seasons.
products, whatever we put out. If some, it's going to have its own perks,
Right.
and we try to distinguish them. Maybe someone doesn't like Kickstarter, so
They
we have Patreon
help
for
us
that.
out the plan.
Yes. So that's where we're going, where we see ourselves going with it. We are continuing with production, finishing the plot and the story, and then making the world more comprehensive and more vivid. In a few months, we're gonna launch our Kickstarter, and we hope that we can stay connected to our audience through this Past Bedtime talks. And another plan that we have is, I think, what probably Jeremy has a few things to talk about, is we are planning on doing a mini series from Philip's world, different stories, short. The soundscape and the music and everything is not going to be as developed as Philip's, but it's going to provide some context and some content as well for the audience while they're waiting for the
next episode or season to
for the season to come. They can listen to these few episodes of unrelated stories, or well, that's going to be I think the audience's job or whatever to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were both very adamant that we wanted to do this podcast in a seasonal format because it takes a lot of work to produce one episode. Not only just the music and the writing and the sound effects, but the acting as well. I think we wanted to keep this story kind of contained and not let things run on by being burdened with, producing a new episode every month or or something, every 2 weeks or whatever. So I think, I was thinking of it actually from the very beginning. I was thinking of this Philip's Apocalypse going into it as like a Netflix series.
Oh.
So everything just, bang.
Right.
It comes out at once and you can binge watch or binge listen or whatever like that. And it gives us time to really develop things and not be constrained by a deadline to kind of half-ass a story and kind of pump it out. So I think we really wanted to maintain creative control by making it a seasonal format. And that's part of the reason why each episode begins with a monologue, kind of relating to the content. Not only a recap, but as the episodes go on, they sort of deal with the one-word title of each episode.
I see. And
they sort of deal in all its aspects in that way. So the monologues are almost like essays, I would say. And then you hear intro music with our fabulous announcer. So in that way, it's very much like a TV show. And I think we wanted to, I don't know if anyone's ever done something like that before.
Well, I personally haven't heard it, and I hope that the audience will enjoy what we've done.
Yeah.
And they will be able to connect to our vision.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Past Bedtime Talks. Thank you so much for joining us. Join us next time as I sit down with other enthusiasts, creators, and listeners for another roundtable discussion. Have a good day and night.